Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're going to talk about building modern railways and discuss why we seem to find it so difficult in the UK to plan, design and construct decent, affordable rail connections. Over the last couple of years or so, we've been celebrating the opening of the late, over-budget and yet ultimately delightful Elizabeth Line, while simultaneously wrestling with the challenge of building HS2, a grand new north-south high-speed rail line, and the Northern Powerhouse Rail project, which is designed to transform east-west journeys across the north. And it's fair to say that with first delays, then cancellations, and a rake of cost increases, and now a rethink and a re-release of a batch of new, old projects under the Network North banner, we are in something of a muddle when it comes to UK rail evolution. And then there's the Great British Railways transition, designed to make everything clear and efficient across the rail, train, passenger interface. Well, let's see what happens there. Well, to discuss this issue, let's turn to some French thinking. I mean, after all, according to many, they seem to know what they're doing when it comes to the Chemin de Fer, as they say. Well, perhaps they do. Well, let's find out. My guest today is Mike Muldoon, Business Development Director at Sistra UK in Ireland. Mike has been at Sistra for just over a year, but before that he spent 13 years at French train manufacturer Alstom, and prior to that as a contractor managing projects for Alstom on the Docklands Railway and London Underground. So he should know what to do. Well, let's discuss. Mike, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, as I say, Mike, you are pretty much embedded in the world of rail. So is the UK in a muddle? And if so, why?
Oh, start with a big question. I think, yes, the UK is in a muddle. Sir John Armitt at a recent conference, when asked to sum up the rail industry in one word, said confused.com. I think that is a good description of where we are. And I think, we find ourselves in this place somewhat shocked to find ourselves looking at the raft of problems and challenges that we now have, moving from the sort of continued growth and development of the industry prior to COVID to where we find ourselves today. It has been quite a journey. Right.
Well, we hear an awful lot about the need to have a strategy when it comes to infrastructure and then stick to it when it comes to major projects. Is that the problem? We just don't have that strategy, and when we do, we don't stick to it.
I think there's a bit of everything there, yes. So we have had a number of strategies for rail and for transport to a degree over the last few years. And when we look at how those have delivered, the majority of them have never been carried through. So when a 30-year strategy has a shelf life of 2 or 3 years before it's replaced by the next 30-year strategy, your implementation process is always going to be patchy, to say the least. So that then, when you apply that into the infrastructure environment where projects run for decades, not just years, you can see where the conflicts can arise and how problems can come about.
Yeah. Well, I say we can learn from the French, and I'm sure you can. We can, but I suppose is that really still true?
I think it's simplistic. I think the grass is always greener wherever we look, and I think there's certainly an element that infrastructure delivery could and should be the same. You might argue everywhere in the world. Because the outcome and the inputs should be the same. The question then is the context in which you're delivering the infrastructure. And I think that is unique to, for example, the UK. So what are we, what is it in our environment that makes it harder to deliver than the French environment? Yeah. And learning lessons then from France reaches into some fairly intrusive areas of British culture and British ways of doing things if we're not careful. So we can learn, of course we can. We can take best practice in terms of how we make and how we design and deliver infrastructure. But what we can't do is translate the French environment into the UK.
Because it's a different country, it's a different environment, it's a different culture. There are major differences in the approach to the design, construction, operation of rail systems in the UK compared to France, Germany, Spain. Can you kind of go through those in simple terms?
I think, yes, there are major differences, and that could be down to particularly the contractual approach. The allocation of risk in contracts can be very different. In this country, we favour a lot of design and build type approach. Overseas, particularly in France, that isn't the approach that's taken. So from that point of view, That doesn't mean that one is better than the other. Again, I go back to the environmental factors that impact it, and also the behaviours that we have around those type of contracts. So as we saw in the operation of the railways over many years under franchising, some very curious behaviours driven as an unintended consequence of the way the industry was structured. And I think, again, if we look at the way that projects are organised in those other countries, we run into, again, those differences of approach. How do we want to allocate risk? Who do we want to be paying fundamentally for it? Where's the upfront funding going to come from? Are we going to fund privately? Are we going to fund publicly? How are we going to organise? When you get into the nuances of that, it's not really national practice that decides that. It might be national politics, but that can change. You can see changes between national parties within any country. So I think hard and fast rules are probably hard to come by.
Yeah. Well, I mean, cut into the chase, I suppose. You've got over 10,000 staff worldwide at Sistra and around 1,000 in the UK, having bought MVA, JMP Consulting, and most recently the former British Rail Design Group TSP projects. I mean, how can Sistra help? What's your special French sauce that you can offer the UK market?
Well, it's got to be creme anglaise, hasn't it? I think from our point of view...
We're stretching the analogy is too far, no, but carry on.
Possibly, but everyone loves custard. I think the thing is that the 1,000 people that we have in this country and the growing organisation that we are is crucial to what Sistra can bring to this country. I mean, globally, we have been the designers of over half of the high-speed rail networks outside of China.
Wow.
A similar proportion of the metro systems around the world we've been involved closely in the design of. So globally we have a huge capability, a huge range of expertise and experience and learning that we can bring to bear. But locally, with the 1,000 people, we have the resources to actually take that learning, apply it to the context of the UK and Ireland, and look at how we best can improve the quality of design, but also inform the decisions that get taken before we start designing and before we start building. A lot of our work is in the planning phase.
Because I suppose that the reality is that technically that is usually not the problem. It is that pre-planning stage. It's that getting the project up and running in the right way to make it actually come out the other side with the right outcomes.
Yes, agreed. Rarely is technology the barrier to actually achieving things. Don't get me wrong, we need to innovate, we need to improve, and we need to develop. But often there are technological solutions that it's harder to apply commercially and practically.
Yeah, well, in the here and now, I mean, Sistra is very involved in the HS2 Phase 1 project. I was down at Old Oak Common Station recently, where you were a Tier 1 supplier as part of the Balfour Beatty Vinci Sistra team. And then, of course, you're also designer for the BBV joint venture in the northern end of the project. What have you learned from that project?
What have we learned? I think the challenge that is set by HS2 is more than the production of a railway. What HS2 has set out to be is a national statement, a flagship project. It has been approached from the outset as something that will almost define Britain.
Right. Yeah.
And so we have aimed to be world leaders. The bar we have to achieve is set very high from the outset. And then we have had to persuade people to go along with that vision and that image. And the persuasion process has led to design development, design change, construction challenges, and if you like, sort of embellishment of what was already a very ambitious project.
Yeah.
And I think what we've learned there is that, the process of laying out a new railway across the country, which is not something we've done a lot of in recent years, it is in today's environment with today's expectations around property, land use, and what constitutes an acceptable piece of infrastructure in the natural environment. We've created for ourselves a very challenging project, and we as Sistra have had to adapt significantly to be able to cope with the design challenges that are set. The issues we deal with here are different to those that we would deal with on a French design, for example. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I'm told that one of your things is that you always ask clients, what problem do they need to solve? Maybe Maybe you got to the HS2 project too late. I don't know. Anyway, what do they most often tell you?
The wrong thing. So I started my career as a product designer. I'm an industrial designer by qualification, and I used to design trains and product and elements of trains, interiors, exteriors. My background there, very often you are trying to deliver someone's vision when they can't explain what they want. I want a fantastic looking train is a great brief, but you need to understand a bit more about what are the constraints around that. How's it going to be built? Who is building it? All of those things. And I think very often clients don't necessarily recognise what they're after. And particularly when you start to look into something that pushes the boundaries, something that's new. It's a bit like if you went back to whenever it was, 2005, 2006, when the people at Apple were scratching their heads and they said, how are we going to change the world? I don't think anyone there turned around and said, I know, let's design a phone. If they just said, let's design a phone, we'd have had probably a nicer looking Nokia phone. But what they set out to do, they set themselves, they defined their outcome differently. They said, actually, we want a computer in your pocket sort of thing. And I think sometimes it's the client vision will draw the best possible design from the designer. Without that vision, without that understanding what you're trying to achieve. And that's what we're trying to explain to people, is to say, look, what is it you really, really want out of this? Then we can give it to you.
Which really overlaps with what my recent guest Rory Sutherland was saying here. He challenged transport designers to think harder about how to improve train journeys before they leap into the process of building new railways. I mean, I presume that your background in designing trains, it's a problem you recognise.
Yes, it was a fascinating podcast with Rory as well. So I think I've discussed these things a little in his circles previously as well. And I think what we have is we have transport planning, of course, which needs to identify a final outcome position, a single solution. And what Rory was very much saying is, we need to look at what will delight people, make it a human thing. The challenge, of course, is that every human is different. We're all individuals, and what delights me might repel you. Yeah. So there's always an element of blending these compromises together. But I think that what is absolutely key in terms of when we're looking at journey experience. For example, if we'd have said, let's not do HS2, let's upgrade West Coast Main Line. What do you think the passenger experience would have been for the 10, 15, 20 years that upgrade took to deliver? Yeah. It would have been terrible. So there's pros and cons to new building versus old building, or versus upscaling or upcycling what we've got. And I think we have to look at both. Is the bottom line.
Well, but he also pointed out that, as you say, that UK transport designers really don't think enough about what makes a delightful train journey. Jumping to speed as the primary objective. He talks about the quantification bias, when people really just want a fold-down table on the back of their seat to make the train journey lovely. Do you agree, or do you recognise this this idea that the design process is just plain wrong?
I don't think it's plain wrong, no, and of course you wouldn't expect me to say so. I think what it boils down to is that there is every step has a compromise, and so speed and perhaps if we look at high speed rail, perhaps it's an HS2. It's been marketed on the wrong basis. Those of us who are close to the project would understand that the purpose of building a new railway was to free up additional capacity to create more space on the railway. And if rail is to play its part in an integrated UK transport network, and it should, because it's the lowest carbon emitting form of land-based transport, so it's crucial. But if it's going to play that part, it's got to have capacity, and it's got to be able to grow and accept modal shift. It's no good looking at what we've got today and saying let's do the same. Making it delightful comes down to the service that we deliver. To some, delightful it can be a low bar. It might mean leaving and arriving on time, and meeting a connecting train and being able to transition across a station very easily, and that's one level. Another level could be a fantastic passenger experience with one seat in a carriage, and I think Rory suggested champagne being served by supermodels. I think that could be another person's delightful. So again, you're back to this idea of trying to find a solution that pleases as many people as possible.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're wrestling with huge cost pressures as well at the moment, brought about by inflation, energy costs, staff shortages. Which I suppose is the reality of where we are right now on projects like HS2. I mean, is there a route through this challenging time?
I think there is. I think a number of those factors. Inflation, there was nothing the rail industry was ever going to do about that. And I think as we look at it is a particular problem for infrastructure projects that get costed at any given time in the time continuum, is that the price that was quoted 10 years ago is the price that's remembered. There's nothing else in life that we can buy for the same price that it was in 2013. But somehow we expect to be able to buy infrastructure at that same price. It has to be factored in. But I think there is a way that the rail sector and infrastructure more broadly can deliver better value. And that is through a planned stream of investment. So in the rail sector in particular, there is a boom and bust cycle of investment, which sees regular risks of people being released, made redundant, lost from the industry, and then recruited back. Now, the obvious inefficiencies of doing that are clear to be seen. So a plan over time that allows industry to invest and allows funders to plan their spending as well, inevitably results in a smoother process of delivery.
Yeah. The transport system, when you think about what we're trying to achieve in the infrastructure world, working towards a more sustainable net zero future, obviously getting people out of their cars and onto trains is one part of that journey. But I think you talk a lot about, especially you talk about having a systems-wide approach and building that rail infrastructure into the rest of our built environment. I mean, how do you see that systems-wide approach actually rolling out? What does it really mean to you at a business like Systra?
Well, I think the challenge of connecting rail into a bigger network and connecting transport modes together is something that we do a lot of work on, even down to looking at the pedestrian flows in and out of stations, the connection then to other modes of transport. That could be, obviously active transport is much more focused upon now. We have a lot of experts in that field. So you're looking at how do we make pedestrian access more viable? But how do we make bus routes more effective? How do we make perhaps light rail systems viable in cities in the UK? It's not something we have a lot of at the moment, but look around the world and that's how people connect up. Again, an example that Rory picked up on was Lyon, and he highlighted that they've halved the journey time to Lyon by putting in the high-speed rail. High-speed rail would mean nothing to Lyon if it didn't have a very well-developed public transport network. And boy, does it have a well-developed transport network. We've designed great chunks of it. We're working on it now, but it's also addressing climate challenges and resilience issues that the city is experiencing as one of France's most climate change affected cities. So lots to bring together, but fundamentally it's giving people the opportunity to comfortably navigate their way through the system and to make sure that they are able to get from A to their B, not our B. I think that is the issue.
Well, no, Systra, you're trying to accelerate the journey. You've got a sustainable design and construction guide. I mean, what is that, and how does it help that whole process?
So, what the objective there is? I've spent my working career predominantly working on the bits that move, not the fixed bits of the transport network. Yeah. And now I'm looking at the fixed bits. And actually, the stuff that moves is becoming ever more carbon efficient. We see it on the roads as well with electric vehicles, arguably much more carbon efficient than their fossil fuel peers. But of course, none of those now carbon efficient modes of transport will operate without the relevant supporting infrastructure, be that charging infrastructure for a car or whatever else, track, road routes, whatever you need for city-based and urban transport. So the carbon content of the transport network is shifting more towards the infrastructure. So as responsible designers of that network, we look at how we go forward, in a net zero world, you can't emit carbon when you're building this network any more than you can when you're using it. So the Sustainable Design and Construction Guide is our initial tool to allow us, sets out a process whereby we break down the task, we look at all the individual elements of the build design process, the build process of whatever it is we're designing, and we question the carbon content. We use a tool called Carbon Tracker, which is a very well-developed analysis tool now. And what that aims to do, it just gives decision makers the ability to factor in real carbon data into their decision-making process. It could lead to a number of consequences, but you can weigh them up, not just in financial and program terms, which is the traditional approach, but also in carbon terms, short and long term. And we think that is the future for infrastructure design.
Okay. The National Infrastructure Commission, in its latest report, highlighted the need for pace, not perfection, when it comes to delivering infrastructure. Obviously, it makes some big points around the need to really drive towards net zero and embrace some of these ideas that you are talking about. But this phrase of pace, not perfection, what does that mean to you?
So what it means to me is once you've set out your objective, stick to it and deliver it. I think that the trouble with perfection is that often it's a moving target. And so if you embroil yourself in repeated change, repeated development, repeated update, inevitably you're going to take longer to deliver. And the frustration that so many people have with infrastructure delivery is how long it takes.
Yeah.
So we can't reap any of the benefits of any of these systems unless they are actually delivered and operational. So I personally, I wouldn't say that means compromised design standards or compromised value from the system. It just means once you've got it, deliver it quick and focus on that. Design for construction. Don't just design it for perfection.
Let's talk a bit about you, Mike. You've been at Sister, as I say, for just over a year, and Alstom for nearly 13 years before that. You're an industrial designer, as you say, by background. Why did you move from a train manufacturing business? You were doing more than manufacturing trains, but that was the heart of that business around that design element of your background. Why did you move to Sistra, which is it's a design business, an engineering design business?
Well, yes, and I as I mentioned earlier, I started my career in design. Okay, it was industrial design, but with a smattering of engineering applied, and so I'm familiar with the design environment. I enjoy that place as a place to work, as a space to work in. It's great for new ideas. It's great for fresh thinking. But also for me, there's an element of sustainability. And as I was just saying just now, as this is a bit about technologies are available. The moving elements of the transport system now are available in carbon sustainable formats. Yet I know there's detailed debate about content of batteries and that kind of thing. But fundamentally, carbon efficient transport can be delivered. You can, move around with low emissions. So the natural challenge then is how to facilitate that. When you look at the talk around the use of hydrogen in vehicles, for example, where's the infrastructure to support hydrogen? How's that going to come about? And what you find is that the challenges we see now in transport are becoming, and the infrastructure to support it are stretching across different sectors and into different sectors, because we have to collaborate with the energy sector. We have to collaborate with other areas to make sure that we can bring together the infrastructure and the device, the system.
So you can't really be a train manufacturer in isolation. You've got to be part of that whole system in order to do it properly. Yeah.
I believe so. Yes, and it's an emerging challenge.
So I presume you use the rail system, Mike, but are you a train nerd?
No, I'm not. I do use it. I am interested in the design of modern trains and the work. It was very fascinating being involved in that, and the innovations that can come about in those vehicles. That fascinates me. But if I was going on a trip to York with my wife, it was my wife who would want to take me to the museum rather than the other way around. She loves the old trains.
Okay. Well, you live on the south coast in Weymouth, I believe.
I do.
Any tips for improving the South West train service?
The first thing I'd say is please bring back the trolley. It's 3 hours, and I think it's 19 stops to get home. If you're rushing and you don't have time to grab something to drink before you get on it, you're practically licking the condensation off the window by the time you get home.
Well, there are fold-down trays, I suppose, but
there are.
Anyway, I believe you're also a STEM climate ambassador, passionate about the role of encouraging more young people into the infrastructure sector, and you regularly give talks at Weymouth Further Education College. What is a STEM climate ambassador, and what have you learned from that experience?
Well, the STEM programme is well established. I think most people will be familiar with that: science, technology, engineering, and maths as a core group of subjects, and trying to promote people to study those areas. Little ironically, I never studied them myself, other than at O-level and A-level. But by the time I did my degree, I did an art degree. But engineering and STEM subjects are perceived almost as part of the problem rather than part of the solution to the climate challenge that we face. And one of the things I want to expose these students to is the contrary point of view, to say, actually, look at what we're doing. So I talk to them about sustainable construction. I talk to them about carbon emissions and how statistics can be manipulated to tell any story, and explain to them to beware. But the key point I would say to them is, you can sit in the road and protest about about the damage being done to the climate, or you could work for someone like us and be paid to solve the problems that we face. We know there is data that suggests that many young people want to work in a sustainable industry. I would say that the rail sector, transport generally nowadays, is very much about sustainability and in making those improvements. So get involved.
What do you do when you're not at work then? Obviously you follow your wife to transport museums, but apart from that? Yeah, I actually like to switch the brain off a little bit and do more with my hands. So I slowly but steadily work around the house, renovating, and from rewiring, plumbing, whatever, right through to customising furniture, building in stuff. I like to build things. In which case, I've got to ask you, what's your favourite tool then in the shed?
Oh, my word. My favourite tool is... I think I love cutting stuff up with a circular saw. It's very satisfying. You can get a lovely quick cut down a long piece of wood, and it's just great. In my experience, a particularly scary bit of equipment.
Anyway, let's go. Getting. I've just got visions of you wielding the circular saw now there. Anyway, let's get back to this issue around getting this new generation, because I know that we've talked about the widening remit of a business like Sistra. Obviously it's about transport, but that has to embrace energy transition. What new skills and talents do you think you need to meet that future need, and where are you going to find them? So, well, I think a lot of the new skills and talents come around the enablers of infrastructure in particular. So we've got things like environmental services. We've got over 100 people in our team working on environmental services at the moment. We do everything from the stereotypical relocation of newts right through to redirection of rivers and creation of floodplains, all of that associated work that needs to go on. And I think actually embracing those kind of areas is beneficial to the attraction of those people. Going back to the point about, generally speaking, young people like sustainable industries. When we look at the makeup of our business, and this was a big change to me, having spent most of my career in the rail industry. Sistra has over 60% of our people are under the age of 44. Now, it's a random age to pick, but 44 is one of those segments where you take the surveys. Our EDI survey reveals that. All of a sudden, I feel old. I used to feel average because everyone was aging with me. But when you in an environment like ours, we've got a lot of new young people, and we get a lot of benefit from having them on board already. And part of the benefit also of that is that they attract more of their own. Word of mouth is great. And that's, if you're starting out and you haven't got them in the first place, which was where we were, then it's those factors around what you do and how you project. We're very keen to be a great place to work, and that is an initiative that we run. Well, lack of diversity does remain a problem across the sector. I mean, and attracting the brightest, smartest young professionals from all backgrounds is the key. I mean, how do you do that? You've talked about word of mouth, but I mean, how do you get that message out?
I think you have to constantly focus on what you're achieving. We're at about 40%, I think, female now in the business, which is a good statistic in the realms we're in. But it starts with the STEM work, really. When I talk to I did some talks recently. One was to the travel and tourism group, and that was 100% female in the room. And one was to the engineering group, and it was 99% male. We've got the stereotypes are baked in really early. And so we need to go right down through the process of education into the earliest possible stages to encourage people to explore things that they wouldn't naturally be expected to study, or perhaps they're getting the wrong steer from home or wherever they're getting their influences.
Well, just to finish off, I mean, do you think what drives you to succeed in infrastructure today is the same or has changed since you started in the business?
I don't think fundamentally it's changed. I've always been fascinated by transport, by this whole idea of movement of people. I can't even explain why. It's just something that came to me early on, so in my teenage years, and so from that point of view, it presents a number of challenges. And one of the main reasons I come to work every day is to learn something new. I'm not one of those people who would do the same thing every day for decades. So there is so much to learn. There's so much still to do and still to achieve. That's what's not to like, really.
Okay. Well, going back right to the first question, I mean, can the UK get better at rail?
UK must get better at rail. It can, but it also needs to recognise that it must. And I think first and foremost, you need that recognition. So we're doing plenty of work to promote the benefits of rail, to explain how it fits into an integrated transport strategy. What probably we lack at the moment is an integrated transport strategy that reflects the different modes and evaluates how best to use them. And again, that's something that we are very able to contribute to, as and when the forum can be created. We can't create it ourselves. We can put out thought pieces. We can opine about what we think is best. But we would want to be one of the voices, or we could give plenty of insight to people who need to form that vision overall.
Brilliant. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast. A really interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more of this crème anglaise being spread over the UK rail system, and nothing like a bit of custard to make everything go down nicely. So, thanks for sharing your thoughts, and thanks for joining me today.
Great fun. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Mike. That's all we've got time for today, but we've got more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website. That's www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information to all the things we talked about today and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So, thanks for joining us, and thanks again to Mike. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.